Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are joining us from. Thanks for joining the section today on Knowledge as Power, where we are looking at why local actors should own data for decision making. I am Bukola Ehimatie, and I'm joining from RTI International, where I currently work as a senior specialist, monitoring, evaluation, research, learning, and adapting. And I will be moderating the section today on Knowledge as Power. Of course, in the company of my colleagues, Amanda, Foster, and Ingrid Overdahl. During the section today, we have three panelists that will be sharing their experiences in the area of benefits, challenges, and emerging solutions for ensuring that data is in the hands of local decision makers based on their experience from the private sector, governments, and academic communities in Kenya and Uganda. In the course of this section, I will be asking a couple of questions that our panelists will be responding to by providing insights and examples from their current work. And at the end of the interactions with the panelists, my colleagues Amanda, Foster, and Ingrid also be able to bring in questions from the participants. So in the course of discussion, if you have any question, please feel free to note it down on your jotters or in the chat, where my colleagues will be able to bring it forward later to for our panelists to address. Let me quickly introduce our panelists. We have Dr. Ehud Gachuga. Ehud is the director of Kenya Private Sector Association's Youth Employment Practice. He has over 22 years of professional and technical experience in youth employment in Kenya and abroad. Currently, he is the director of Nigeria Digital at the KEPSA, a digital economy project for the Ministry of ICT and the MasterCard Foundation. Dr. Ehud's program leadership includes a leading USAID and World Bank funded projects. Ehud is an advocate for youth employment and entrepreneurship. He was the executive director of Itline Community Center. Good to have you, Ehud, and thanks for joining us from Kenya. We have Mr. Moron Vincent. Vincent works as a senior ophthalmic clinical officer with the Moroto District Local Government in Karamajo, Uganda. He's the sub-county supervisor for the NTD Trachoma Elimination and Control Program, and he supports trachoma crisis surgical camps with funding and support from Sightsavers International. Vincent is also the National Gender and Social Inclusion Trainer and is a focal person for quality improvement activities. He's currently practicing as ophthalmic clinical officer, and he has been doing this for the past 20 years. He has a diploma in clinical medicine and ophthalmologist. We are expecting Vincent to still join the call very soon. He's working remotely in Uganda, and we hope that he will be able to join us to provide very good insights to the topic today. Lastly, we have Professor Peter Waganjo Wakacha. Peter is a faculty member at the Department of Computing and Informatics at the University of Nairobi. His research covers health informatics and digital health, urban transportation, human language technology for local languages, and the use of ICT in education. Peter currently serves as a project director for the USAID Health IT project based at the University of Nairobi, a health system strengthening project working with the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Labor and Social Protection. Peter is passionate about mobility, is much into tech transport, and he has been involved in digitizing paratransit in Nairobi over the last 10 years through the Digital Matatus projects. Good to have you join us, Peter. So quickly we'll dive into the discussion around what happens when data is in the hands of local actors. So I will pose this question, and Peter, maybe you go first. How would you complete this sentence, Peter, when data is in the hands of local decision makers?
Thank you very much for inviting me, and I'm really happy and elated to participate in this event. Straight to your question, I think my response would be, if data is in the hands of local actors, These local actors have a tool that they can use in terms of engaging communities. They also have a tool to visualize the situation on the ground. And through this, they're able to engage in conversations and discussions that could actually bring meaningful outcomes. As an example, I work a lot in the health sector here in Kenya, supporting health system strengthening. And one of the pieces that I see every day is the fact that once data is available to local users at various levels, it opens up this opportunity to have a conversation, opens up the opportunity to map where you are and map where you're moving to or going to, and also looking at the past. So, provides this lens that you could also look at where you are, or where you were before, where you are, and where you're going. And I believe this then makes it possible for better planning, including looking at processes, looking at resources, and of course, looking at the opportunities that could be thereof.
Yeah, thank you very much, Peter. And I love that point, around ensuring that data is in the hands of local decision makers for planning and, of course, for resource management. That's kind of stands out. So, Hugh, how would you complete the same sentence when data is in the hands of local decision makers?
Yeah, thank you for that great questions. And indeed, when data is in the hands of local decision makers, many good things happen. And part of these good things is that policymakers are able to see the gaps and understand situations much better. The other thing is that when decision makers have data in their hands and use that ethically and in a transparent manner, then this builds trust and legitimacy in terms of the causes that they are championing, whether it is working with communities, whether it's working with other partners, whether it is policy formulation, whether it's implementation of programs. That then helps to build a trust and legitimacy in the work that they're doing. Relatedly, having data is one thing, but also being able to unpack the data through various analytical tools then helps in shaping policies that are quite informed by actual situations that are really happening. And this is what we've seen mostly in our work with the policymakers. So as an apex body of a business membership organization in the country, we do work a lot with a public sector in terms of shaping national policies and making sure that they are informed by the interests of the private sector. So as such, we do a lot of work to make sure that the policies that are being formulated in all levels of government are data-driven, and we incorporate this thinking right at the very beginning. So just being able to have these resources available and people available to become honest broker and helping to unpack that data into meaningful use then helps in shaping the conversations in a more meaningful way. But also one of the nuances that we've been noting is the aspect of contextualization. When local decision makers have information on very granular activities happening in different parts of their decision-making points. So whether it's at a very low local level, whether it's at a sector level, whether it is at a national level, whether it is at an intervention level, that level of contextualization that blends data and culture, then we see a more effective data-driven culture evolving slowly, and this is easily driven by decision makers. So by and large, in our experiences, this is how decision makers are able to utilize data when it is in there.
Yeah, thanks, Ehud. I love your points on transparency and kind of wondering if we have been able to establish that, okay, when local actors, stakeholders have data, a whole lot of positive changes can happen to policy, a whole lot of changes can happen to interventions. So what are the challenges that you see, affecting data ownership at that local level for decision making? Yeah, you can go first, Hugh. What are those challenges that you see, that might be affecting, this conversation?
Yeah, it is not a one size fits all. The challenges really are nuanced around context, around the environment in which the policymakers do operate. But one major challenge that we have consistently noted is lack of available data sets and data in the forms in which they are consumable. And so with the advancement in technology, we still see that data is stored in silos. Data is stored in formats and forms and shapes that are not usable, they're not retrievable, and that really hinders policymakers from accessing well laid out data that they can use to advance the policy agenda. The other that also speaks to the data quality, and I think by and large, by the fact that sometimes when we are collecting this data, we do not even know the outcome or the objective, but we're just collecting data simply because we were told that to have this data, and it's part and parcel of the sort of returns that you have to give after going to the field. But then the quality of that data, and there are no processes in which we normally use to review the quality of that data. But lastly, the whole concept of data and data literacy is really an important topic, because having access to data is one thing. Being literate on how to access that data, how to transform that data into usable products is another conversation altogether. So even with data being available, data literacy remains a big challenge to most individuals and policymakers across the globe. And this then points to the need to really think through, how then to bring this sort of capacity across the board to anyone who is responsible for decision making, either at local level or at whichever level of influence one is operating.
Yeah, thanks, Ehud. Let me still ask again on your points on data literacy, kind of trying to look at the root cause. Could the challenges be issues of not having the right curriculum or the right tools to train people, or we don't have the people to be trained? Where does the challenge really lie? Does it lie with the instruments to be used for training, or does it lie with human resources?
It's from my perspective, it's all those. It's a culmination of all that, and also the fact that there's a cultural factor into it here, and the cultural factor means that how have we evolved in terms of our practice of using data to make decisions and to inform the interventions that we're making. Again, I always say that we're living in a political economy, so there are many externalities that also influence data literacy and the need to do so. There are also, capacity issues that comes in because there are people who definitely would see a data and make sense out of it, but there are those who see it as a statistic. And so there are many reasons as to why the literacy is still low. And this is definitely not a one size fits all. I keep on reminding myself that in some instances of some people are able to use it well based on even how the functions within where they operate are structured. Others do not even have those levels of structuring to allow data to be serviced and to be used and then consolidated in ways that they can use. But I also think the curriculum, the mindset around how we view data is something that needs to be addressed, because it's also a huge contributor to the data literacy challenge.
Yeah, thank you for touching base on mindset. Okay, Peter, let's come to you. What are the challenges you see to data ownership, especially for local decision makers?
Thank you. I would very much agree with Ehud's response. I think We see many challenges out there. I think he's elaborated on quite a few. But I think just a general aspect around a culture of data use, I think I can't say it actually lacks, but I think it's something that's actually changing over time. But I think coming from a background where data use was not a mainstream, we can actually see that just the culture of looking at data and looking at the data point and then trying to understand what does this actually mean, and then using it to help bring change and to help us move to the next level. I think that in a way, that capacity has been lacking, but I'd like to add that that's actually growing. Another area I'd also like to add is, development is cross-sectoral, but often you find data sitting in one sector and not talking to data in another sector. So we've kind of perfected that, even with the available data that could be there, we've perfected having data in different streams and data not coming together for a better view. I think that could also be the other thing. The other aspect, I think, is also around when you think that the data is not of good quality, then the confidence of using that data also goes down, and that may also result in just the attitude around not using data. And others I could also add also include the fact that for the decision maker, often they would like to have relevant, concise data at the point of making a decision. But sometimes this may not necessarily be available to them. And not only the availability in that sense, but also availability in a way that they can easily consume, easily understand. Because I see most decision makers, irrespective of what level they are at, the time that they have to actually make a decision is pretty constricted. And if the data is not available in a really quick, palatable way, then of course, that opportunity is basically lost.
Thank you very much, Ehud, in terms of why data should be available, and at the same time why it should be presented in a way that policymakers can make use of them in a very limited time that they might have for decision making. So talking about all of these challenges, I think to also be good for us not to leave that hanging. What do you think are the potential solutions to a few of those challenges that we have mentioned? We can start with you, Ehud.
Yeah, just to chime in again, one of the things that we forgot to mention around challenges on the evolving nature of regulations on data. So, of course, as people become aware of the need to secure data and make sure that personal information, data about certain sensitive information is not used or lands in wrong hands, that there is the tightening of regulations. For example, we see in Kenya there's a new data protection regulation and associated acts and policies around it. And what that then means is that the concerns of data and cybersecurity issues then becomes quite paramount. And one way of addressing that really is making sure that these regulations that are coming to support are progressive and they are well known and understood. So making sure that the policy environment, the regulatory environment is open and people are able to know the do's and the don'ts of collecting and picking personal data and data that is sensitive, of ways in which this data can be shared and ways in which that can be shared, in what situations and in which aspects that can be shared. That then becomes a very, very important way of ensuring and guaranteeing security as well as confidence across the entire data use ecosystem, that no data goes to wrong hands or is used in ways that are not meaningful. The second point relies to the point that Peter talked about, fragmentation of data and the fact that sometimes, this sort of patronaging of data, especially by various organizations that are entrusted with that responsibility. It's such a big, challenge that then encouraging data sharing in a very structured way, having platforms that are open source and, promotes open access is an important solutions to this. I always say that, for example, in development work, we are always doing baselines, day in, day out, new program, doing baselines. But if there is a proper way of ensuring that this information is shared across different actors, from policymakers to decision makers, to implementers of programs, to designers of solutions, to educators, and to the society as a whole, then the investments there will be well utilized. The other point that is critical is that as more data comes on board, we are realizing that we need to have a very robust data infrastructure. And this is something that has seriously been missing because we have stored data in various forms that are not accessible, not retrievable, but also have shelf life due to the nature in which they're stored. So as such, it's important that investments then move towards making sure that we have the right data infrastructure, from data management systems to data centers to making sure that the security is robust enough to protect that data and in ways in which it's accessible. My last point is on, again, as I said, for me, the biggest challenge for policymakers is again around mindset and how we can build this culture that, data can really help us to address the real issues, but more so identify solutions that are relevant and are in line with the changing nature of the kind of policy evolutions that we're looking for. And with this fast-paced world where largely, half the population is living in the cloud and the other half is living in the world, then having, clarity around how the data is generated, which areas most of data is really can be found, then enlightening yourself around that, building deliberate structured literacy programs for policymakers, for all actors in the ecosystem, is a very important solution that need urgent attention, especially then if you have to start being intentional and deliberate about use of data in all the works that we do.
Thank you very much, Ehud. Yeah, your points on building deliberate structures to continue to advocate, to policymakers to embrace data, to put in resources and investments into data management sounds so great. And I think, it's what everyone should be going forward with, to continue to advocate for that, at various sectors. Okay, Peter, let's come to you. What are the potential solutions you think, we could be exploring to kind of address a few of those challenges that we have mentioned today?
Okay, so picking up from what Ehud mentioned, I think areas of literacy. I think just looking at where decision makers are at, and also taking cognizance that they could be at different levels. This could be decision makers at different levels, looking at where they are at and looking at their level of data literacy. I think the opportunities to have curricula that is able to address some of this, and also just practice. I see opportunities around knowledge and the skills and, of course, attitudes. I think if we have curriculum that can address this, then I think we have a really good opportunity. And, of course, really pushing the boundaries around just having conversations around data. So where we gradually build a culture of data use and, of course, changing mindsets gradually. I think that could be one of the solutions. Another area I see solutions are in the area of looking at the opportunities that digital transformation can avail to us. If you just take a snapshot and look at what mobile money has done for some developing countries like Kenya. Then looking at that opportunity of digitizing and making sure that for that particular example, how money moves very quickly and how irrespective of what who you are, there's a service that's available and there's adequate infrastructure. If we can look at the infrastructure, for example, in areas like in health, investing more in availing infrastructure in that space. We are looking at maybe data centers. You're looking at training people to be able to run these data centers. You're looking at also training people who are able to look at data and synthesize it in various ways. We're also looking at just availing the basic infrastructure at, for example, if you look at, once again, if you look at health, where I do a bit of my work is availing just a tablet or a simple device to collect data at the health facility, or even at the community level. You empower a community health practitioner or volunteer with a tablet that then they're able then to collect relevant data, and then making sure that the infrastructure is so well designed that other actors are able to access the data, they're able to access what they need. I think this then can bring about this transformation that I think would really be beneficial in countries like ours, developing countries. I also see opportunities also around the area of just looking at governance, really trying to look at the governance piece and leadership piece around, hey, what data do we need, and where is the data located, and who wants the idea about data ownership, and making sure that the data then is freed to be available to individuals or stakeholders who would be making decisions using it. So I see also that space of leadership. I see the space of just making sure that we have the right infrastructure. As Ehud mentioned, we have the Data Protection Act, that being some of the foundation in terms of look at securing the data and protecting the data. I see that as an area that also needs, if we make inroads in there, then we would be able to make data available to policymakers. Another area I see is availing the data more openly, for instance. Of course, it will depend on what type of data. In my experience, maybe just to cite an example, at some point, the University of Nairobi, we were able to avail data around the matatu. A matatu is a public system, a public transport system. We're able to collect that data and make it available. It's a really simple task, collecting the data and availing it. But what we did is that we availed the data and made it open. We used open standards. And that way, then the data was freed and made available to a bigger audience, irrespective of at what level. And I think opportunities abound where we can make that possible, of course, within the realms of data protection and security. So I see that also as areas where we can actually, that can actually also provide other solutions that can enable a bit of this. The other aspects I see include collaboration, sharing, and having sharing protocols and so on. My background is in tech, and some of they exist technology to enable us to share data very easily, so long as we conform to certain standards. And herein, if you look at health and you look at other sectors, there's an opportunity to really create platforms that would enable that availability of data across platforms, across sectors, and indeed by doing that, then the available resource of data and looking at data as a resource would then be shared and would be available for many more decision makers at various levels.
Thank you very much, Peter, for those insights. And I really love your points on collaboration for sharing. And I think that might even be one of the solutions we should be looking at when we want to ensure that we standardize the system and framework for data gathering, because one of the challenges you see around capacity is the fact that in some cases, even these data collectors are overloaded with different kind of information, definitions, of different indicators and data elements. So I'm sure international organizations, local partners, will do so well in ensuring that we are able to really standardize the framework and system for data collection to be able to ensure consistency across all board. I know there are a few questions coming in already. My colleagues will be able to quickly jump into the chat later to throw up the questions from participants. But before we do that, maybe we can quickly spend a few more minutes to talk about, what I think is really burning now. It's a major issue. People have been wondering, okay, so if we are making progress, why is this topic still on the table? Why are we still having this conversation? So as experts in this field, Ehud and Peter, how do you think the conversation around data ownership and decision-making at the local level has evolved over the years? Ehud, you might want to start. You can come off the speaker.
Yeah, the conversation around data ownership really is picking pace in terms of people being aware that, of course, data as a service is such an important and strategic configuration that all decision makers, whether you are in a boardroom or corporate or in a public service or in an enterprise anywhere, data as a service is something that all of us are aware that's an important discussion. So over time, that awareness of the importance of data, people will ask even young people everywhere around doing small businesses do know the number of people coming, and the time they come, they have that pieces of data, whether they aggregate it, whether they transform it into some meaningful usage to predict behavior, or to just also project certain aspects of business or community event or activities or certain progression. It is another thing. So over time, people have become aware that, of course, data is important. It can be used as a service, and therefore it is important to have it. And that's really why we've seen the craze around, everyone wants to have some level of data with them, and as such, the element, the first layer of usage then and adaptation then has already been well taken care of. However, this is not to all. There's still a lot of work that is required to make sure that everyone within the entire ecosystem, economies where we operate is aware that it's important to use data to make such decisions. But as Peter said, the purification and the developments that have taken place in the last 30 years or so are really, around the infrastructure, connectivity, and digital adaptation have propelled the conversation on data ownership quite fast. And these are the things that need to continue to reinforce and also use data again to know how to pivot quickly if need be, to make sure decision makers have the right data and they're using it for the right sources. My other point is around empowered recipients of decisions, and this is really critical when you are now dealing with a more empowered people who can look for information and can judge the quality of decisions you're making. And the benchmark now is no longer local; it's a global benchmark, and this then points to the need for fast tracking these capabilities within people responsible for certain decisions. And so we have seen that level of an empowered recipient of decisions, ensuring that then even the ones who are really using and utilizing these resources have to really raise up their standards to make sure they are actually in tandem with the recipients. And this really is the whole power of digital transformation, and the fact that now we are operating within a globalized economy where sharing of data, information, exchange of best practice is no longer a challenge. And so with that, there has been very good progression. It is not structured. It is not moving in the same sort of speed everywhere. There is still a lot of work that needs to get done to bring everyone to the level in which then we can be able to see the real value of this data that we keep on saying it's the new oil for us that we need to really make best use of it.
Thank you very much, Ehud. Yeah, data is the new oil. I got that. And let's quickly come to you, Peter. What would be your take, on how you think this conversation around data being in the hands of local decision makers has evolved over the years?
Once again, I'll agree with Ehud. When we look at the recent past and then we look at where we are, clearly you can see strides in terms of use of data and, of course, availability of the same. But I think some of the drivers of this are, in my view, also relate to the fact that there is greater demand for accountability, greater demand for transparency. And what better way to illustrate this but by data is perhaps one of the best and most powerful way to do this. As also Ehud mentioned, we have more empowered recipients of within the community or at different levels. We are looking at more empowered people looking at trying to ask the questions. They already have, in certain areas, you can have people who already are looking at the data, and if their leaders are also not looking at it, if the decision makers are also not looking at the data, then there's also they're able to have a conversation and take leaders take them to account. And then I also think that they're also really moving fast forward. We can see the advances that the availability of data enables and opens up. For example, we are talking about AI, we are talking about big data, we are talking about data science. We can actually say that today we are more looking at using data to look at our current situation, but now we have opportunities to even predict what the future could look like. So I think also those are other drivers that are also in that mix of some of the movement or some of the aspects that are driving this opportunity to invest more in data and to avail data to decision makers.
Thank you very much, Peter, on your points, on increased investment, to ensuring that we have more structures and more resources to continue to drive data agenda, especially, the need to use data for decision making. We have a couple of questions from the audience. My colleagues, Amanda and Ingrid, quickly take us through those questions. Then we'll come back to our discussion. But of course, they will also let us know which of you will be responding to those questions. Over to you, Amanda and Ingrid.
Hi, thanks so much, Bukola. I have a first question here from one of our participants, Christina. She says, I like your point about when data quality is an issue, it creates a low confidence in using the data. How can we overcome this confidence issue with our staff and maybe data collectors as well?
I could pick that. So thank you, Christina, for the question. From the little experience I have, I think things like proactive using data has a way that gradually improves the quality of the data. Because what happens is you have more people, you have more eyes on the data, and in a way that that naturally forces and drives the enhancement of quality in that data. But I guess also opportunities around just having more confidence around the data collection processes and making them more visible, availing tools. And I think one of the things that I've seen over time is when you digitize, for example, when you digitize data in health facilities, the quality immediately goes up. And that way, if we have investments in that area or investment of that nature, we can actually see these gains very, very quickly. But I think even when you have data available from digital systems, I think a king there is around data use. Once the data is used, it certainly spirals into improving that data.
Yeah, thank you very much, Peter. Would you want to also quickly weigh in on that question around how to build confidence, for data collectors and staff?
Yeah, I like Peter's submission on this particular point around, the fact that the more we interact, use, the more we improve. And I think this is golden rule and a rule of the hand about usage and learning. But I also wanted to add the aspect of the capacity. And I think this is something that we have seen over time, that the capacity does not necessarily improve immediately. It's something that has to be ingrained in the people who are in the data practice in general. And so constantly you have to keep on, learning and relearning. And that's that bit of showing interest that whatever you're doing is of importance, and any decisions you make here means so much for other progressive decisions. Then that really is helps a lot in building confidence, especially for your internal team that's responsible for supporting the data sort of strategy. Largely, of course, the automation of these processes is very important, but also educating people and making sure that you are also showing people the results and the impact of their work, and they can actually be able to celebrate things that are coming out as a result of the tremendous work that comes with data collection and analyzing, and sometimes being just at the back of your desktop and you never see what this means in real life. So keeping just reinforcing the impacts, the meaning, it really helps to change the attitude and perception, and as such helps to ensure that people are clear on quality. My last point on this is around the protocols. What you've been doing here, because of the sensitivity and the nature of our work and the fact that we need to have data that is collaborated and speaking to the needs of very large constituency, is to have different points in which data is actually reviewed, and as it gets reviewed, feedback is provided, and therefore we build that culture where there's accountability at different levels, and that then makes the final product very robust and acceptable to everyone, and can be used in meaningful ways.
Thank you very much, Hugh. Great point on ensuring belonging and involvement, to see that colleagues, staff, and data collectors are able to really understand and be part of the successes, that those data has recorded. Thank you. Okay, we can go to the second question from the audience.
Great. The next question comes from Peter Mayers, who says, thank you for this important discussion. As the panelists have flagged, use of data is not neutral. For organizations that often supply data to policymakers and donor clients, how would you advise us to manage the political economy of data use?
Right, Hugh, do you want to go first?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think this is the reality of the conversation we are having, because in essence, if you're saying that we need to put more data in the hands of policymakers, then we cannot associate this point from the fact that it's also important for certain other considerations and decisions that are made within a political and economic environment. And as such, one of the things that we have, and this is just what we've done ourselves, is to ensure that, first and foremost, I think at a larger economic sphere is about regulations, and it did articulate the fact that, having, data protection laws that limits or guides how data can be used, personal data, whoever is using it, the fact that there are certain, internal structure that needs to be in place for you to be able to share that information. It is a very important first step at a regulatory level to make sure that the regulatory environment does provide for mechanisms in which data can generally be used by everyone who is collecting it and also using it. But also at a more granular level, what we've actually been doing is to sign up protocols, and there are certain ways in how data is transmitted. And the decisions and the reasons for that has to be provided very well in advance. And of course, we do not share personal information that then can jeopardize the use of the data. But we've also seen really good progress around the understanding that yet, of course, that this is important, but even as policymakers are also bound by laws and regulations. And so, limited, we're seeing progression around, having discussions on what type of data should we share and how should we share it, which format. And so we are alive to this fact. We are trying to, we definitely is still something you can fully eliminate from the equation. You can try to minimize as much as possible. Automation does really help. Like, for example, if ways in which you have dashboards that gives aggregate data and statistics that are relevant, then also does help a lot in that. So basically, we try to prevent this as much as we can. We tighten and use laws as much as possible. Use protocols, apply technology to help. But we are alive to the fact that this is something that also needs to continue. We continue to reinforce and to work towards, sort of being data neutral in all circumstances and situations.
Thank you very much, Ehud. Peter, in 1 minute, would you like to also quickly weigh in on how to manage political economy of data use? Just in 1 minute.
Thank you. So I think I'll agree with Ehud. I think regulation is one piece. The other piece, of course, is digitizing, for example, automation for that matter. But I think also just being aware of the data that we are using, and of course, awareness comes with a sense of ownership. I think once there is ingrained ownership of data, and it's ownership along community. It's not just one individual, one organization. It's data for all of us. I think that provides that opportunity. And of course, the aspect around making sure that the data is available in a more open way, I think could also provide an opportunity that we are able to look at data and we're able to use it and kind of push it towards the neutral end. But I guess I think this sometimes can be a moving target. But I think with some of the recommendations or some of the suggestions we provided, I think this should provide a really useful way as to address this.
Thank you very much, Peter and Ehud. I wish we could continue, but we have less than 2 minutes on this section, and I'm sure the participants would be planning to jump on some other sections that they have registered for. Let me thank SID-US conference for making this possible, which for me is one of the ways that this conversation will continue to evolve. Now that you have conferences, depending irrespective of sector, everybody wants to talk about localization of data for decision making. So thanks to the organizer. Let me quickly say a very big thank you to our panelists for providing very useful insights into this topic. And of course, to our participants, thanks for spending 15 minutes of your time with us today. And we hope you enjoy the rest of the event. Thank you, and please do have a good day.